The sun had barely risen over the Philippines on January 11, 1945, when Captain William A. Shomo taxied his P-51D Mustang down a rough airstrip carved into the jungle. The dawn air was humid and still, thick with the scent of war and the echoes of recent battles. Shomo, then assigned to the 82nd Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron, was not planning a typical dogfight that day. His orders were clear: conduct a fighter sweep and photo reconnaissance mission over northern Luzon, the large island in the Philippine archipelago then crawling with retreating Japanese forces. It was a mission like many others, and though danger lurked in every cloud, no one could predict what would unfold just hours later, a legendary aerial feat that would mark Shomo as one of the most extraordinary combat pilots of the war. He wasn't alone. Flying alongside him was his wingman, Lieutenant Paul Lipscomb, another pilot who had earned his wings through months of grueling training and was equally determined to do his part in the fight against the Japanese Empire. Both men flew F-6D Mustangs, a reconnaissance version of the famed P-51. Though the aircraft bore cameras in place of some of its combat gear, the F-6D was still a capable fighter, armed with 6.50 caliber machine guns and a top speed of more than 430 miles per hour. These aircraft gave their pilots the unique ability to defend themselves while completing vital photographic missions. Their flight path took them along the coast of northern Luzon, skirting past mountain ranges, valleys, and stretches of jungle. They had already spent some time photographing targets of interest when, without warning, a formation appeared on the horizon. It was a Japanese bomber escort flight, one twin-engine bomber, likely a Kawasaki Ki-48 Lily, and no fewer than 12 fighter escorts, presumed to be Nakajima Ki-44 Tojo and Ki-61 Tony aircraft, all of which were among Japan's more capable interceptors at the time. The formation was moving in a loose diamond pattern, heading toward enemy-held territory. Outnumbered more than 6-1, most pilots would have immediately turned away, radioed in the sighting, and lived to fight another day. But Captain William Shomo was not most pilots. Without hesitation, he radioed to Lipscomb, "Let's go get M." Then he throttled his Mustang forward and climbed toward the enemy formation, taking the Japanese completely by surprise. The sheer audacity of the attack would later become the stuff of legend: 2 lone American fighters against a squadron of 13 Japanese aircraft, the odds overwhelmingly stacked against them. Shomo approached the formation from above and behind, using the sun and altitude to his advantage. His first target was the bomber. With steely precision, he dove onto the aircraft's tail and opened fire. A stream of bullets tore through the bomber's fuselage, igniting the fuel tanks. The aircraft erupted into flames and plummeted toward the jungle below. Almost simultaneously, Shomo wheeled his Mustang around and set his sights on a nearby fighter, closing in before the pilot even realized he was under attack. Another burst from Shomo's gun sent the Japanese fighter spiraling toward the ground. At this point, chaos reigned among the enemy formation. What had moments earlier been a disciplined bomber escort mission had turned into a desperate melee. The Japanese fighters scattered in all directions, trying to evade or counterattack. But Shomo wasn't done, not by a long shot. He swung his Mustang back through the formation, identifying one enemy fighter after another and shooting with unerring accuracy. Each pass brought another kill. His 6th target disintegrated in mid-air under his relentless firepower. His 7th victim tried to evade by diving sharply, but Shomo followed him, closed the gap, and fired again. The aircraft exploded in a fireball that marked the end of the brief but brutal encounter. In all, William Shomo shot down 7 enemy planes in a single mission, an achievement virtually unheard of in the Pacific theater and one that rivaled some of the most famous exploits of fighter aces in the European skies. His wingman, Lieutenant Lipscomb, also contributed to the astonishing outcome, downing 3 more fighters during the skirmish. Together, they accounted for 10 enemy planes destroyed in a single sortie, a feat that stunned even the most seasoned veterans of the war. What made the victory even more remarkable was the brevity of the engagement. The entire dogfight lasted no more than 6 minutes. In that short span of time, Shomo demonstrated not only raw courage but unmatched flying skill and situational awareness. His ability to maneuver through a formation, fire accurately, and evade enemy fire while outnumbered was nothing short of exceptional. It was the kind of feat that usually existed only in propaganda or wartime films. But this was real, and it was happening in the Pacific jungle skies. After confirming the results of their mission, the two pilots returned to base, their Mustangs low on fuel and riddled with signs of the intense battle. Ground crews and fellow airmen listened in disbelief as Shomo recounted what had happened. Some thought he was exaggerating. 7 kills in one mission? Against a fully escorted bomber flight? But the gun camera footage, damage assessment, and Lipscomb's own account left no doubt. William Shomo had achieved one of the most remarkable individual victories in U.S. military aviation history. Word of the incredible mission spread quickly. Within days, Shomo's name was being passed from base to base, and eventually across the Pacific. His report reached higher command, and soon he was nominated for the Medal of Honor, the United States' highest and most prestigious military decoration. Unlike many wartime citations awarded years later, Shomo's nomination moved with uncharacteristic speed. The act had been so audacious, so well documented, and so significant that there was no hesitation among his superiors. But William Shomo's story didn't begin on that fateful January morning, nor did it end with that incredible mission. He had already proven himself in the air long before that dogfight, and his path to becoming a Medal of Honor recipient was paved with discipline, skill, and a quiet resolve that belied the fiery courage he displayed in combat. He was not a man of brash words or cocky demeanor, but one of steadfast professionalism, an officer respected by his peers and admired by his squadron. And while that one mission cemented his legacy in the annals of World War II aviation, it was only part of the story of a man whose love for flight and duty carried him into the fiercest skies of the Pacific. Shomo was born in the small town of Jeannette, Pennsylvania, in 1915. His childhood was typical of the era, marked by the lingering effects of the First World War and the hardships of the Great Depression. From a young age, he was fascinated by flight, gazing up at the rare aircraft that soared over his town. Like many boys of his generation, he built model planes and dreamed of becoming a pilot. But it wasn't until war loomed again in Europe and Asia that Shomo had the opportunity to turn that dream into reality. He joined the Army Air Forces and, after completing his flight training, was assigned to the Pacific Theater. At first, his duties were more focused on reconnaissance than combat. Flying F-6 aircraft, his job was to capture photographic intelligence over enemy territory, a dangerous but often overlooked role that required precision, courage, and an ability to remain calm under pressure. These missions frequently took place over hostile areas, with anti-aircraft fire and enemy fighters ready to strike at any moment. It was a role that required more than just flying ability, it demanded instinct, decision-making, and a commitment to the mission even when the odds were against you. In this environment, William Shomo quickly earned the respect of his peers and commanders. He was methodical and fearless, willing to take on the most difficult assignments. And while reconnaissance was his primary responsibility, he never hesitated to engage the enemy when the opportunity arose. By early 1945, he had already built a solid reputation as a skilled and dependable pilot. But nothing in his record could have prepared the world for what he would do on that January morning. That single mission would not only define his military career but also become a shining example of the courage and tenacity that characterized the best of American airpower in World War II. In the skies over Luzon, against impossible odds, Shomo had shown the world what one pilot, armed with a good aircraft, a clear mind, and unwavering bravery, could achieve. In the days following the mission, Captain William Shomo's life changed forever. What began as a routine reconnaissance sortie had transformed him into a hero, though he would never call himself that. Fellow pilots treated him with newfound reverence. Commanders pulled him aside to debrief every detail of the engagement. And across the various squadrons in the Pacific, stories of his daring circulated like wildfire. Pilots who had never met him spoke his name with awe, some calling him the one-man Air Force. But Shomo remained modest. When asked about the mission, he gave credit to his wingman, to the Mustang, and to luck. "We just hit them at the right time," he would later say. But behind the humility was a pilot who knew exactly what he had done, and how quickly things could have gone the other way. Every second of that 6-minute dogfight had been a razor-thin gamble with death. A single missed shot, a single enemy lucky enough to get behind him, and history would have remembered Shomo as another pilot lost over Luzon. But instead, he returned with a record that would stun even the most seasoned aces. Back at his base on Mindoro Island, Shomo resumed his duties, continuing reconnaissance flights and offering tactical guidance to younger pilots. He never changed his routine, never grew arrogant, and never let the attention distract from the mission. That restraint only enhanced his reputation. He wasn't a glory seeker. He was a professional who had done his job, with exceptional results. Soon, his superiors began the formal process of awarding him the Medal of Honor. The application passed through command channels with little delay. The documentation was irrefutable. The gun camera footage, enemy aircraft wreckage, eyewitness accounts from his wingman, and the after-action reports all told the same story. One pilot had taken on a heavily escorted bomber formation, and in just minutes, reduced it to chaos and destruction. Not only had he eliminated the bomber, he had personally accounted for 6 additional enemy fighters. 7 kills. 1 mission. 1 pilot. On April 6, 1945, just 3 months after the legendary mission, William A. Shomo received the Medal of Honor from General George C. Kenney, the commander of Allied Air Forces in the Southwest Pacific area. The ceremony was modest by Washington standards, but deeply significant. Standing at attention in his flight gear, Shomo accepted the medal with grace and a quiet nod, surrounded by fellow pilots who understood better than anyone what that moment truly meant. The citation read in part, "He boldly attacked the enemy formation and by skillful maneuvering shot down 7 enemy aircraft in one engagement." Captain Shomo's extraordinary heroism, superb airmanship, and gallant devotion to duty reflect the highest credit upon himself and the United States Army Air Forces. It was the kind of wording that had honored only the bravest of the brave, and now Shomo's name stood among them. Unlike many Medal of Honor recipients, Shomo lived to see the honor bestowed. And yet he never stopped flying missions. He remained active with the 71st Tactical Reconnaissance Group, continuing to fly combat sorties and lead fellow airmen until the end of the war. For him, the medal didn't mark an end to danger or a ticket home. It was a symbol of duty fulfilled, and a reminder that the war was not yet over. Even after receiving the Medal of Honor, Shomo refused to rest on his accomplishments. In the final months of the Pacific Campaign, he flew dozens more missions, often over Japanese-occupied territory where enemy ground fire and fighters remained a constant threat. Each time he took to the skies, he carried the same focus, the same precision, and the same quiet resolve that had brought him through his now famous mission. For Shomo, the bond with his aircraft was deeply personal. The Mustang had become more than a machine, it was his sword, his shield, his companion in the sky. The sleek, bubble canopy design gave him a commanding view of the battlefield. Its powerful engine, superior speed, and high-altitude performance gave him a fighting edge over nearly every enemy plane he encountered. But it was his ability to exploit every ounce of that aircraft's potential that made the difference. In the cockpit, William Shomo wasn't just a pilot, he was a tactician, a hunter, a master of the air. But even for the best, combat left its scars. Behind Shomo's composed exterior, the pressures of war weighed heavily. He had watched good men vanish in flames, had returned from missions with bullet holes in his fuselage, and had faced the gnawing uncertainty of every takeoff. He had walked the thin line between life and death too many times to take anything for granted. That emotional burden, invisible to those who celebrated his victories, was something he would carry long after the war ended. As Japan's surrender approached in the summer of 1945, the mood across the Pacific changed. The mission tempo slowed, and base chatter turned from combat plans to dreams of going home. For Shomo and his squadron, the end of hostilities meant a chance to return to civilian life, but it also marked the closing of a chapter that had defined them as warriors, as men, and as Americans. When the war finally ended in August, Shomo returned to the United States a national hero. Newspaper articles lauded his courage. Veterans groups honored his service. Young boys collected trading cards with his photo and dreamed of flying Mustangs just like him. And yet Shomo himself stayed mostly out of the spotlight. He didn't give flashy interviews or write a memoir. He quietly re-entered military life as an officer in the newly formed U.S. Air Force, where he continued to serve with distinction during the post-war years. Though his combat career was behind him, his reputation followed him throughout his military service. He was promoted, took on command roles, and mentored younger pilots who grew up hearing stories of Wild Bill Shomo, the ace who had once destroyed 7 enemy aircraft in a single mission. He served with integrity and professionalism, never once leveraging his Medal of Honor for personal gain. He remained, as always, a man of duty. Outside the military, Shomo was equally reserved. He settled in Pennsylvania and embraced a quieter life with his family. For years, he spoke little of the war. Only on occasion, at veterans' events or reunions, would he recount the events of that fateful day over Luzon. And when he did, it was never with arrogance or flair, but with a clarity that made those listening feel like they were in the cockpit beside him, dodging tracers, watching the clouds flash with gunfire, and hearing the engine scream as he dove toward another target. His story eventually became part of American military lore, taught in flight schools, commemorated in museums, and preserved in documentaries. In an era of collective sacrifice, his individual bravery stood out. It was a reminder that sometimes history turns not on the might of an army, but on the courage of one man willing to act when others would hesitate. As the years passed, fewer and fewer World War II veterans remained to share their stories. But the legacy of William Shomo endured. Every generation of fighter pilots who trained in the decades after the war learned his name. They studied the tactics he used. They learned the lessons he had lived. And many drew inspiration from his calm under pressure, his decisiveness, and his belief that the mission came before everything else. For the American people, William Shomo's story was more than a tale of war. It was a symbol of hope, courage, and the human capacity to face overwhelming odds and prevail. He had taken to the skies on a simple mission and returned with a place in history. Not because he sought it, but because his actions demanded it. In the twilight of his life, William Shomo remained a humble figure, content to let the history books carry his legacy while he enjoyed a quiet existence far from the roar of aircraft engines and the intensity of combat. Though he had accomplished something almost mythical in the skies over Luzon, he never allowed himself to live in the shadow of that moment. To those who knew him personally, he was simply Bill, a man who loved his country, his family, and the profession of flight. His humility persisted even as honors continued to arrive. Veterans associations frequently invited him as a guest of honor, and aviation museums requested his presence at dedications and exhibitions. He was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross, the Air Medal, and numerous campaign ribbons throughout his military career. Yet, none of these distinctions ever seemed to change his character. He remained grounded, always deflecting attention back to his squadron, his wingmen, and the thousands of others who served with equal bravery but without the spotlight. In his later years, Shomo became more willing to share details of his wartime experiences, not for personal glory but to ensure that the sacrifices of his generation would not be forgotten. At air shows, veterans' events, and schools, he would speak softly but with clarity. He emphasized the responsibility of military power, the cost of freedom, and the importance of duty. Young people who met him were often struck not by the legend, but by the calm sincerity of the man himself. For them, he wasn't just a war hero, he was a living connection to an era of raw courage and unwavering resolve. One story he often repeated, when asked, was not about the 7 kills or the Medal of Honor. It was about his wingman, Paul Lipscomb. Shomo always made sure to note that without Lipscomb watching his six, without his trust and steady flying, the mission could have turned out very differently. He reminded listeners that in the chaos of combat, trust between wingmen could mean the difference between life and death. That deep respect for comradeship never left him. Shomo's influence extended beyond the cockpit. As an officer in the post-war U.S. Air Force, he helped shape a new generation of airmen during the early Cold War. He brought not only tactical knowledge but also a moral compass, an understanding that victory must be paired with responsibility. He served until retiring with the rank of lieutenant colonel, closing his active duty career with the same quiet dignity that had defined his wartime service. After retiring, Shomo focused on his family and community, living in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. He was active in civic life and occasionally visited airfields or gave lectures when invited, though he never sought publicity. For him, heroism was not about medals or memories, it was about doing the right thing at the right moment, and then moving forward with humility. In 1990, the aviation world lost one of its most remarkable figures when William Shomo passed away at the age of 75. His death marked the end of a chapter, but not the end of his story. Obituaries from coast to coast celebrated his incredible achievement, and tributes poured in from veterans, historians, and fellow pilots. Many newspapers ran headlines that read, "Ace of Aces," or "1 against 13," referencing the mission that had stunned the military world and earned him his place in history. The United States Air Force honored him as one of its legendary aces, and to this day, his name is included in every serious discussion of aerial heroism. At the National Museum of the United States Air Force in Dayton, Ohio, his name and deeds are preserved for posterity, ensuring that future generations understand the scale of what he accomplished, and the character of the man who did it. Among the many statistics and records of World War II, William Shomo's mission remains one of the most exceptional. In the span of 6 minutes, he forever altered the calculus of courage. 7 confirmed kills in one sortie. A 2-man team against a bomber and 12 fighters. A mission that began with reconnaissance and ended with history. It wasn't just the numbers that stood out. It was the boldness of the decision. The fact that 2 pilots could dive into a vastly superior force and dismantle it piece by piece with calm aggression, calculated risk, and almost surgical precision. It was the type of mission that military strategists would later study not for its scale, but for its sheer audacity and success. In the larger context of the war, it was one of many turning points that slowly eroded Japan's ability to resist. Every plane that didn't make it back to its base, every pilot lost, weakened the empire's shrinking air force. And while Shomo's victory did not win the war by itself, it accelerated the unraveling of enemy air power in the Pacific, especially over the vital Philippine theater. What Shomo proved that day, and what military historians emphasize even today, is that superior tactics, training, and willpower can offset overwhelming odds. His feat has become a metaphor for courage, the kind of example that transcends its time. In modern fighter pilot schools, students still read about Shomo's mission as part of their curriculum. It's used not just to teach air combat tactics, but to instill a mindset, the refusal to back down when the mission demands action, the trust between wingmen, the courage to strike first and strike hard when the opportunity presents itself. Shomo's story resonates because it reflects something universal. It tells us that greatness is often born not from long planning or large numbers, but from the split-second choices of individuals willing to act decisively. It reminds us that sometimes, the most extraordinary heroes are those who never ask for praise, who simply do what must be done and then carry on. And so the image remains, a lone P-51 Mustang slicing through the sky over Luzon, 6 guns blazing, enemy aircraft scattering in panic, and a young captain in the cockpit, focused and unflinching. William Shomo's story is written not just in the medals he received or the records he set, but in that moment, when one man, facing a wall of enemies, chose to attack. Even now, more than 7 decades later, that moment continues to inspire.